on this computer. Okay. And if you look at the top left, you probably see that that's happening. A very brief introduction to myself. I am Ken Witt, a retired American Baptist pastor, living in the hills, the beautiful hills of southeastern Ohio, where we lead a spiritual formation ministry called Traces of God. My wife is sitting across the table from me, and she is a gardener, a flower lover, a bona fide lover of animals and organic gardening. And we do a lot of that kind of back to the earth work around here. I am one of the conveners of what we're calling the Baptist Resilience and Adaptation Community, which is simply a support group ministry for climate justice leaders who find themselves isolated or having difficulty getting attention, and so just need places to support each other. And we're open to anyone becoming part of that network. And if you go back to the invitation you received, the flyer, you'll find Catherine Smith's email, or you can contact me because we both are the conveners of that gathering. And we meet once a month, and it has already been an extremely important part of supporting our work on behalf of the Creator, to care for the creation and to seek and know and tell the truth about what's happening in the world. I want to begin by sharing a few words of scripture that are out of the Hebrew Bible, and they reflect what I think is the best creation story in the Bible. And let me just read some verses from Psalm 104. And I'm going to be skipping around the verses. Psalm 104 begins, "Praise the Lord, O my soul. Lord my God, you are great. You are clothed with splendor and majesty. God set the earth on its foundations, and it cannot be moved. You covered the watery depths as with a garment. You set a boundary that none can cross, that covers the earth. You make springs pour water into the ravines, and the ravines flow between the mountains, and they give water to all the beasts of the field. The wild donkeys quench their thirst. The birds of the sky nest by the waters. They sing among the branches. He waters the mountains from his upper chambers, and the land is satisfied by the fruit of his work. He makes grass grow for the cattle and plants for people to cultivate, bringing forth food from the earth, wine that gladdens human hearts, oil to make their faces shine, and bread that sustains their hearts. The trees of the Lord are well watered, the cedars of Lebanon that God planted. There the birds make their nests. The stork has its home in the junipers. The high mountains belong to the wild goats, and the crags are a refuge for the hyrax. And I do not know what a hyrax is, but what I do know reading that story is God created all of this for all of us, including creatures great and small, plants, flowers, the food that grows from the earth. The whole circle of life is specifically, intentionally, the creation of God, and it all matters, and it all feeds into one other thing, and we're all here in it together. There is no human exceptionalism in the creation. We are not the only reason that life is thriving on this planet, and we have a responsibility for the future, and we cannot fail to pay attention at our great peril. That being said, Tom Carr and I began a conversation a while back and decided that we wanted to make this conversation today on Earth Day happen. And part of our hope is that our global servants, people who work in other countries around the world, they know things about what's happening now that some people in North America anticipate, but it's already the current reality, and it's already affecting our sisters and brothers around the world. So Tom is going to open us with a prayer, and then we will move to right to Dwight Bullock sharing with us, and he will introduce himself.
Thank you. So let's open ourselves to God in prayer. God, you are creator and redeemer of all beings. You are most high and most near. You're bound up in the very web of life, within and through all life. You are love. And it was love that was the source of your blessed creation in the very beginning when you said, let it be, and it was so. In the blinking of an eye, through love, all came to be. And it is through love that you are still moving and shaping life. And in that love and from that love, we come at this time of crisis for your creation, for your people, for all of your creatures, and for Earth herself, to recognize and acknowledge where we are and that we are responsible for the chaos that is upon us, that we are responsible for how we might take bold action steps to restore harmony within all of your creation. And so remind us of who we are, your children, and that we are one. As Christ is in you and you in Christ and we in you and within all of life. May we live that unity. May we put on the mind of Christ and so live it. And may we see that your light and truth is before us always in order to lead us in the work of restoring the harmony of life that is your will. And now, O God, for these servants of yours who are presenting this day, we are grateful for their work and their witness, their love of you, their love of the people to whom and with whom they minister, and their love of all creation. May their words today reflect your word for this moment in time, and so move us to mirror their work with the people, places, and creatures that we serve. Let us be open to the Spirit, who blows where she wills, and live with compassion and in love. Amen.
Dwight, welcome.
Okay, thank you. My name is Dwight Bullock, and I, with my wife Barbara and family, worked in Chile for about 18 years and doing economic community development with Mapuche people, with Baptist Convention, rural churches, and communities. Right now, we're working on special assignment with our colleague Ricardo Mayol in Central American countries. And let me just say, he alone and what he's doing there could be an entire presentation here for something like this. But I'm working with him in particular on a project called Water for All. And my mustard seed contribution is developing and training rainwater harvesting systems to meet severe water crisis needs there. So I've been asked to speak about rainwater harvesting and beekeeping today, two things that I've been intensely involved in and you might even say obsessed with. Everything I see comes down to rainwater and bees these days. But I want to start by just sharing three scriptures that keep sounding in my mind as I think about this and wonder how to share it. One is from Acts 14:17, and it's a short little evangelistic sermon by Paul, in which he basically just says, turn away from pursuing what is worthless and seek the living God. And the phrase he uses, he says, this God who has not left himself without a witness in doing good, giving you rains from heaven and fruitful seasons, and filling you with food and your hearts with joy. So if that's not a spirituality and evangelism that's rooted in meteorology, if you will, in agriculture, I don't know what is. And there is enough. There's enough for all of us. And then the other passage that rings in my mind is, we all know the image of the good life that appears sometimes in the Old Testament. I think it must have been well known in the Middle East at that time too, because and it's basically every person sitting under their vine and their fig tree. Once again, enough. But in Isaiah 36:16, we have the king of Assyria. I think he's stealing that image, and he's coaxing the people of Israel to come with him. But what he says is, he says, you'll have every person under their own vine and fig tree. But then he adds something. He says, and they'll drink each one from their own cistern. Everyone drinking from their own cistern. So in other words, the good life, I buy this too. The good life includes being in control of your own water supply, being a good steward of it, not ruining it, but our own water supply. And that became a dire situation that I saw in rural Chile and now in Central America, where the constant refrain ran into was there's no water for a variety of reasons. And then finally, I just want to leave this passage from Jeremiah. Jeremiah in chapter 2:13, he calls God the fount of living water. And obviously we can take this on a spiritual way and also in a very physical way. And I think it's perfectly legitimate, without water, we're dead. God is the fount of living water, but he's chastising the people of Israel, Jerusalem in particular, and Jerusalem, I might remind us, depended on rainwater. They had rainwater harvesting systems. They carved cisterns out of the rock and they collected rainwater. It rained, the majority of their rain fell in like 2 or 3 months, most of their rain. So they had to collect rainwater and use it and save it. But Jeremiah here is chastising them because he says, you've forsaken the living God, the fount of living water, and have built for yourself broken cisterns. Broken cisterns that don't hold water. Once again, this speaks, obviously speaking to a spiritual, religious negligence and crisis, but I think it's fair to say that he's also speaking to a failure of stewardship, even of ecological stewardship, that I feel justified in taking that as a call to repair what's broken, to restore water supplies, to protect them, and to take care of them, because God is the fount of living water. So they actually depended more on rainwater collection than on digging deep wells as well, I think. But we're in a situation now. I really love the title of a book by Ched Myers that calls it Watershed Discipleship. And I think that's kind of what we're called to do, is watershed discipleship, knowing where we are on the earth, knowing where our water comes from, intimately acquainted with the streams, tributaries, each of our own watersheds. In the US alone, there's like 8 major rivers that are in danger of drying up over time, maybe in the next 50 years. So I'm going to speak about what I saw, the situations in Chile and what I saw recently in Central America, where the constant refrain was, over time in Chile, there's no water, especially in the summertime. In Chile, we lived in what we call like the foothills of the Andes, and the Mapuche people, everybody who lives in rural areas, depends not necessarily on deep wells. It's the rich people have deep wells. The poor people in the country, in the campo, the Mapuche people depend on springs coming down from the foothills of the Andes. Farther up in the agricultural valley, more on glacier melt, snow melt from the Andes coming down in irrigation canals. But over time, as we lived there, every summer, the water situation got worse over these last 15, 20 years, where basically the springs that they depended on for their water dried up, and they were without water most of the summer, which means no water for their animals, no water for their gardens. This is due to climate change, for one thing. Certainly there's a severe rainfall deficit in Chile, from north to south. So it's due to climate change. Everybody notices that the weather, the rainfall is just different now. The people who live in the campo and the country feel it deeply. There's other reasons for the lack of water. And I'm thinking mostly of people who live in the country, small farmers, so forth. There's privatization, where large agricultural producers, through legal maneuvering, just basic bullying, kind of privatize the water, commodify it. And small farmers are squeezed out, where their little farms don't have water, but the big plantations of avocados, citrus fruits, and so forth have plenty of water. So you've got all through Chile, people living on farms with no water in the crucial summer months in particular. And then there's another cause in Chile, just as flat out corruption and injustice. In the Pinochet era, there was a decree passed, Decreto 701, which complicated thing, but it basically subsidized or gave benefits to large forestry companies to plant huge plantations of eucalyptus and pine all around, all throughout southern Chile, surrounding Mapuche lands, which one of the things it did was just destroy the biodiversity that existed there for their herbal medicines and so forth. So you've got huge plantations of eucalyptus and pine all around Temuco, the city where we lived, and in much of the south. These are surrounding Mapuche indigenous lands. And I've asked people, it's been around over the last 20 years, what was it like here 20, 30, 40 years ago? And everyone said that the water flowed. It was abundant. There was no lack of water, even through the summer. There were sporadic rains, but it wasn't like it is now. And what it is like now is basically the people in the campo in these areas surrounded by the eucalyptus and pine plantations don't have water. They don't have springs. The eucalyptus, the pine sucks up the water from the underground aquifers and water sources. So now there's no water. And how does Chile governments, municipalities respond to this? Not really in looking for creative solutions, ecological solutions, even more sustainable forestry. They do it by just trucking in water. So most people in rural areas all around Temuco, where we lived, farther south, municipalities truck in water on big trucks, and families of 4 might get a ration of 1,000 liters per week. That's it. And whatever other sources they can find. I had many Mapuche people say we simply weren't going to plant a garden before the rainwater harvesting system came. In Central America, where I work with Ricardo Mayol and Recompas, which is the Continental Christian Network for Peace, I just want to say again, this is a small part of that huge project. We're working on a project called Water for All, which Ricardo has gathered a remarkable core of activists and partners who are doing education, doing protests, doing dialogues, looking for creative solutions to the water crisis there. And in the 4 countries that I visited, El Salvador, Guatemala, Nicaragua, and Honduras, many of the same situations that I saw in Chile. Privatization, commodification of water, big companies bullying small people, the huge bottled water industry. Where are they getting their water from? Mining activities, in particular community that we worked with, where we have a video at the end of resources here. I have a video of a rainwater project we did in Guatemala in a small mountain village that their water sources, it's been basically destroyed, contaminated by mining activities of a silver mine, unsafe levels of arsenic and cadmium, the water supplies. So you have mining, you have deforestation. Many of the people that we saw and visited have to walk for miles just to wash their clothes in some stream or an outlet where there's a spring. And those are drying up. There's less water. There's no water in many places. But I want you to consider this refrain of there's no water with some rainfall data. So it's not an absolute sense in which there's no water. It's more relative, because this is what I saw and felt in Chile. Okay, we get more rain than Seattle. In Chile, in the Mapuche areas where we lived, it rains all winter long. There's tons of water pouring off a roof like that. Most of the houses in the campo with no gutters. So water pouring off. Where does that water go? Well, it doesn't go, it's not saved. Most of it might erode topsoil and go eventually directly to the sea. Maybe 80% of the rainfall, if it's not collected responsibly in tanks or in good agricultural practices, goes straight to the sea. But I just want to give you some rainfall data. in Temuco, Chile, where we lived, get 58 to 60, maybe even more inches of rain per year. That's more than we get in Chile, in Texas. In El Salvador, the average might be 72 inches. And of course, this varies from region to region. In Guatemala, 52 inches, can be more or less. Nicaragua, 45 to 100 to 250 inches of rain. Honduras, 33 to 95 inches per year. In Mexico, Oaxaca, where I'll be working next, 31 inches for rain. In Mexico City, maybe 27 inches. And I want to mention that Mexico City is right now about to start a massive rainwater harvesting project, putting rainwater harvesting systems in as many houses as they can to deal with the crisis there. In most of these countries, there are rainy and dry seasons also. But you have to ask, so much rain, more than we get in Texas, where rainwater harvesting is a cottage industry. Why no water? And that's what I asked myself many times. And I would ask the Mapuche friends of mine, I'd say, why don't you do rainwater harvesting? And they said, well, why don't you show us how? And so that's what we wound up doing through a project from One Great Hour of Sharing. Over the years that I was there, the last several years, we installed about 25 systems. And these are not meant to solve all the problems. They're simply meant to be demonstration, pilot project systems to show how it's done. It can be replicated and expanded according to need with government funds or private funds. That was the idea of doing these, and simply to put them up in key places. We put them up in many homes in the country, put them up in schools, rural schools, and also even in partnership with the city of Temuco, schools and so forth. And most of the people here use this water for household needs, for showers, for the bathrooms, for cooking or consumption, but the majority use it to keep their gardens and animals alive during the crucial summer months. Just some basic rainwater harvesting math. Take a roof like that. If you take the formula to figure out how much rainwater we're going to collect in those tanks is every square meter of roof space times the millimeters of water. And excuse me, as I think in metric system now, I can't switch. But it's metric square meters of roof space times millimeters of water, rainfall, equals how many liters of water you can collect in a year. So if the total rainfall in Chile, let's say, is 1,400 millimeters, and if we have a 100 square meter roof, we can collect 140,000 liters of water in a year. If we have a 50 square meter roof, and we even get half of that, 700 millimeters of water, rainfall, we can collect 35,000 liters in a year. There's overflow as well. And I have spreadsheets where we can calculate more precisely supply and demand and calculate essentially how many and what size tanks we need to put there. But most of the systems that we installed are basically subsistence demonstration systems meant to show how the system works and to encourage people and municipalities to replicate them and to adapt them to circumstances. So in most cases, we may meet a certain percentage of the demand, but my philosophy is something is better than nothing. This one here is pictured with 4 tanks, and all that water is used. They have a market garden, which is in danger of losing because of long-term droughts. So that water goes to keep their gardens going during the summer and a household use during the winter. That's a brief, in a nutshell, vision of rainwater harvesting, how it works and what it does. Ideally, rainwater harvesting of this nature should be coupled with permaculture, sound agricultural practices, regenerative agriculture, where they're creating ways of capturing rainwater in the soil through swales, where we capture it and let it absorb deeply and replenish the underground water sources through ponds and so forth. And there's a link to an incredible documentary, 2 documentaries, one that I want you to look at the end that I think Rebecca can show you where those are, that demonstrate linking rainwater harvesting with good agricultural practices. And there's a video, I think, at the end of the latest installation we did in a school in Guatemala, in a little mountain village that has absolutely no potable water supply from the municipality, from the city. A little school that serves 84 students and teachers and kitchen workers. And they used to have to truck in or carry in all of the water that they would use for the bathrooms and the kitchen and so forth. And now they have hopefully a year-round supply of water from rainwater, and they're incredibly excited about it. And
Dwight, can you
am I out of
finish
time?
up? Can you finish up in a couple minutes?
Yes,
Okay,
sorry.
great, thank you.
And then I have to speak about beekeeping, and I know not everybody's a beekeeper or will be a beekeeper, but I want to focus more on just what I learned from beekeeping, what I learned about basically bees will make an environmentalist out of you unless you're going to be seduced by the industrial model of beekeeping, which is heavy use of chemicals, overfeeding with sugar, unhealthy practices. In Chile, I did a beekeeping project financed by White Cross, where we basically taught people a sustainable livelihood, both men and women. And the basic question I want to leave you with beekeeping here in the interest of time is simply I learned to ask, what do the bees need? What did bees do before beekeeping? And the beekeepers that we taught beekeeping to in Chile and here in the US, you can get pushed into doing another style of beekeeping, which is what I call industrialized beekeeping, where the focus is all on production, taking as much honey out as you can, feeding excessively with sugar water or fructose, and using pesticides inside the hive to kill a parasitic mite. We found that was just not economically or ecologically feasible, and so I began encouraging what I call natural beekeeping, which is treatment-free beekeeping, using a type of top bar hive, which is less expensive, more economically feasible, not as many expensive inputs and materials. So what I want to leave you with, basically with beekeeping, this is an example of a top bar hive there. That's simply all they need. They don't need to keep on buying materials. Beekeeping for me models a way to work in concert with nature. If we ask the question, what do the bees need? Just like we ask, what does the soil need? And what were they doing? What were they doing before we came along? And to try to do it as much like that as possible. And become, I think our spirituality needs to be anchored in entomology, in meteorology, in botany, in biology, to develop this beginner's mind of approaching bees or approaching anything in creation or nature. What does creation need? What do the bees need? What were they doing before agriculture, before beekeeping? And do something with your hands. Put your hands in the soil. Watershed Discipleship, what he calls it. And Wendell Berry says simply, go somewhere and stay put. Get to know your watershed. So that's all. I'd like to conclude there. Sorry.
Incredibly good conclusion. But I'm not going to say more than that. Thank you. That is a really awesome presentation, and the theology and spirituality that you close with is incredibly important. Okay, Dr. David Wheeler.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. After those wonderful evocative pictures that Dwight shared with us, I just have this bare bones, low-tech visual that I'll use over the next few minutes. Dwight, thank you. And lest you feel bad, I can almost guarantee that in a few minutes, Ken is going to have to call time on me.
Yeah.
I'm a theologian, both by temperament and by experience. And the two most important influences on my life, prior to meeting Carol at least, have been the Church of Jesus Christ and the Christ of the Church. And the second is what my brother and I used to call back in the field. I grew up in Louisville, Kentucky, in a new post-war suburban development. It's almost inner city now, but we could go over our back fence and wander in the undeveloped land, which was disturbed and ecologically degraded already then. But the birds and the bees and the frogs and the turtles and the scrubby bushes and remaining trees put me in touch from my very earliest years with God's creation. But in the church, I was hearing a different refrain. And maybe some of you have this experience. This world is not my home. I'm just a passing through. My treasure is all stored up somewhere beyond the blue. The angels beckon me to heaven's open door, and I can't be at home in this world anymore. It's so the theology that undergirds that hymn is a theology of this is just a testing ground. This is just temporary. We'll use the resources here as we need them, but it's not our destination. And we get to our destination by accepting Christ as our Savior, our personal Savior, and getting our ticket to heaven. And yet, if we cruise to and fro in the scriptures, both the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament, the destination that's described is very different. The picture of the future that's there is very different. Human fulfillment, human destiny is connected both in this life, Dwight was so eloquently speaking of that, but also in the life everlasting. And so we have well-known images. The image from Isaiah 11 of the peaceable kingdom where the wolf and the lamb and the bear and the lion and the little child and even the scorpion will all dwell together in harmony, and the earth will be as full of the knowledge of God as the waters cover the sea. Or then a number of prophetic references, the Isaiah 43 that I've listed here is just one of many, which talk about the deserts blooming, talk about God's renewal and perfection, transformative perfection of God's original creation. But I'm really interested in this text from Revelation. I could spend a lot of time on it, but I'll just say briefly, it's an urban text. Our destiny is pictured in a city. And sometimes those of us who have an ecological conscience and consciousness, we're really very skeptical of cities, even though now a majority of the world's population live in urban centers. But the New Jerusalem is a city, and yet a river flows through it. And the tree of life grows on either side of the river. I like to say that the book of Revelation shows a riparian habitat as central to God's fulfilled reign, what Matthew calls the kingdom of heaven. So pictures of the future all show God's human children living as we do in this original creation and ecosystem. Then, of course, we have lots of pictures of now with the sinful brokenness that is God's creation presently, with our complicity in that sinful brokenness. In fact, we could say we're drivers of it. Many of us are aware of this text in Romans 8, which talks about the whole creation groaning like a woman in labor, waiting for the eventual revelation of the sons and daughters of God. The scripture speaks of the creation being subjected to discord, subjected to brokenness, and we're agents of that brokenness. So we could spend a lot of time looking at these scriptures, but I would just encourage you, as I encourage myself, to read the scriptures, both the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament, with an ecological eye, a systems eye, a connectedness eye, because we're all in this together. But before I go to my 2 case studies, I want to look at a scripture which you may not recognize immediately. I've rarely heard it preached upon in our Baptist preaching services, and I have never heard it addressed from an ecological perspective. This is Paul, of course, 1 Corinthians 3. We know that Paul has this theology that we are saved by grace through faith, not anything that we do or anything that we are on our own. But here in 1 Corinthians 3, it's really an eschatological text in an odd sort of way. Paul says that all of us, our well-being here and in the future, all of us find that well-being based on the one foundation, which is Jesus Christ. Salvation by grace through Jesus Christ. But then he talks about all of us building on that foundation. Some build with gold and silver and precious stones. Others build with wood and hay and straw. But Paul goes on to say that the day, meaning the day of judgment, will test what we've built. But when I think about what Dwayne has just shared with us, when I think about what we're living here on the West Coast in 2020, 5 of the 6 most ferocious and extensive wildfires in the history of modern California happened in 2020. The day will test the work, and the day will come as fire. What an appropriate and contemporary image. And Paul goes on to say, if the work that anyone has constructed on the foundation of Christ is burned, the builder will survive. That is, our eternal security is not based on what we do or don't do, but the builder will survive as through fire. Now, one of the things that is problematic with this world is not my home theology and ideology, is that there's a discontinuity between here and hereafter. But in Paul's thinking, I wouldn't claim he's an ecologist. That's a modern word and concept, or maybe it's an ancient and indigenous word and concept. That's another conversation. But Paul was an urban dweller in the early Common Era of the Roman Empire, but he did see a continuity between here and hereafter. We are in a building project, and what we build can carry over not only from generation to generation here in this present age, but carries over into whatever God has in store in the age to come. And so, as a theologian, I think we have to seize on that vision of continuity. We have to seize on that vision of a life here and a life hereafter, however we understand that, as being an essential connection. And we are God's co-laborers, we are God's co-gardeners, we are God's co-builders, not only here and now, but as far future as we can even imagine. So in the last 3 going on 4 years now, I've been privileged to teach in a Master's of Theological Studies program. A 2-year is kind of a compressed MDiv, but it's co-sponsored by the Board of International Ministries. J.D. Reed is one of my colleagues in that program, and Palmer Seminary. And it's on an online platform. I was very skeptical of that before I started. I've been teaching theology in various institutions since the 80s. And to me, nothing is more personal than Christ and his church and our reflection upon our life in Christ, thinking about our faith, that's theology. But I've been privileged to build some deep and fulfilling relationships with students in a number of countries in Central and South America, as well as across the United States. Mostly this is all in Spanish, except when we go to Brazil, where it's an interesting pastiche of Portuguese and Spanish. We call it Portunol. But when I go through what's basically a systematic theology with my students, I look at the various classical loci of theology, God, Christ, church, human destiny. I talk about creation and fall. And at the end of the theology course, the students have two assignments. One is to do a theological essay on a topic of their choosing, something that's within the classical loci that I've presented in the course. But the other is what I call a theological project. It's a practical application of thoughts and learnings that they have had not only in this course, but in their theological journey. And so over this 3+ years of teaching, a number of the practical projects have been chosen in areas of eco-justice in response to climate crisis. I haven't been trying to coach them there explicitly or consciously, but many of the students are living on the front lines of climate change, as Dwight talked about what he's experienced in Chile and Central America. Dalia Juarez Fernandez is coordinator of the Mayan, Seminario Intercultural Mayense, the Mayan Intercultural Seminary in San Cristobal de las Casas in Chiapas in Mexico. And her project, practical project, involved, first of all, an intensive course of study and reflection with her students and her colleagues, not only in that seminary, but in the ecumenical community in and around San Cristobal de las Casas, where she looked at biodiversity as a theological issue, and where she looked at the connection of illiteracy, malnutrition, and deforestation and soil degradation in connection with the faith convictions of the people among whom she was serving.
Yeah,
then,
David, I'm going to
Okay.
generously ask you to do this in 5 more minutes.
Okay.
These stories are awesome, but I
got it.
Okay.
It's but practically, she and her colleagues are creating a seed bank. They are looking at agricultural practices in the land around San Cristobal de las Casas, which will move away from agricultural chemicals, which will move away from pesticides. She and her colleagues and students are creating an agricultural alternative based upon a theological perspective. Now, here's the second one. Jose Antonio Alcamirano is, or I should say was, he tragically died of COVID this spring at the age of 53. The COVID crisis is rampant in many of the places where we are teaching. But he and his church, the church which he founded in 1997, called Camino de Salvación, the way of salvation. But it was not simply this world is not my home kind of church. It was a church that from the beginning looked at an integral gospel, a whole gospel, and specifically subsequent to the terrible 2010 earthquake in Haiti, where a number of refugees arrived in Baja California, his church developed a program not only of hospitality and shelter for Haitian immigrants, but he trained church members to investigate the public services opportunities, the educational opportunities, the employment opportunities that were open to these immigrants. He recruited university students from the state university there in Tijuana to be involved in this. They set up counseling for the immigrants to help them adjust to their new environment and find job opportunities. And the title of this project was called Somos Peregrinos. We are all migrants. And we know that one of the outcomes of the current crisis climate, and it will be worse before it's better, is climate refugees. So the church not only needs to take positive steps to mitigate and respond to the global climate crisis, but we also need to be responsive and caring and loving to those who are its victims, because they are our sisters and brothers in God's creation, but sooner than we may think, some of them will be us.
Oh. Okay, thank you very much. I just have to say that I spent a lot of time on Zoom conversations as we were preparing, and spoke with people in Mexico and across the world, and the grief and the suffering that they're bearing, and yet still coming out on the other side with hope and energy to do the next right act of love in their communities is a real testimony to the power of faith and love. If you get a chance to find out more from David about these projects, well, it'll be well worth your while. JD works in the same region. As soon as the COVID crisis allows them to get back to Bolivia, and I'm really excited that David can be here. His wife Rhonda also works with him in that setting. So, JD, you're on.
Thank you, Ken. Appreciate it. We do live and work in Bolivia. We live, my family and I, my wife Rhonda, and our 3 kids, 2 of which have now graduated and are in college and graduating and getting married this year. And our 1 son is still home with us. Live in Santa Cruz, Bolivia, which is in the Amazon basin. But the majority of our work in the country is in the city of Cochabamba. I have a second portfolio where I get the privilege of working with and becoming friends and compatriots with David Wheeler on the faculty of the MTS program, and a bunch of other of us around who are teaching students from as far north as Billings, Montana, to as far south as Concepcion, Chile. And we even now have students who've moved up into Canada, and one is a Brazilian missionary who lives in Senegal. So we have a lot of people in a lot of different places through that program. And I'm very fortunate and privileged to be a part of that faculty and administration. I'm also, our local ministry is in the city of Cochabamba. Originally, we were going to specifically be in the Amazon basin, as we had another missionary family. Dr. Mario and his wife Iris Morales were there. Unfortunately, she developed cancer and passed away, and he resigned. So we took over the ministry. It's called the House of Hope in Cochabamba. Cochabamba is a beautiful city. It is northeast of where Dwight was living, but in the same mountain range. We're in the Andes Mountains, and the people in Cochabamba would say they were in the foothills as well, even though they're 9,000 feet above sea level, because La Paz is up around 16,000 feet, and so they're kind of right in the middle. And Cochabamba is a really amazing city of about 2 million people, give or take, that is one of the places that was the primary locations for the Quechua people of Bolivia. They're all throughout Bolivia and some in Peru and Chile as well, but they kind of found a home in Cochabamba. The word Cochabamba itself is adapted from the Quechua words Cochabamba, which means the high plains with lakes. Back in the original days when this was a valley, before it became this large city, it was this giant plateau in the middle of the Andes Mountains filled with these beautiful lakes and grazing lands that people would from all around in these tribal zones they had certain sections of the area zoned off per tribe so they could bring their livestock and animals and families and graze and use the beautiful sweet waters of Cochabamba. It was then called the city, it still is called, but it was then named the City of Eternal Spring. The average temperature is around 75 degrees. It's always beautiful. The flowers are always in bloom. And it's just a wonderful place. But what's happened over the years is because of multiple reasons, one of them being climate change, most of the people in Bolivia are migrating into the city. Some of them, like David mentioned, are climate refugees. They've lived in outlying in the Campo in many different regions in and around Bolivia, but statistics will tell you that in the UN that in the next 10 to 15 years, around 90% of the population of the entire country will live in one of 5 or 6 cities. And so everyone has moved in. And so because of that, there's no more lakes and there's no more grass and there's no more beautiful, there are beautiful places, but there's no more natural spaces. It's all just this big giant city. And so people are coming in because they can't find work, partly because the climate has changed the rain flow, changed the water flow. And a lot of these glacial lakes, and in the mountain, the snow that comes off of the mountains has steadily decreased over the years. Part of the reason for that is Cochabamba is kind of in a bowl. It's a plateau valley, but there's mountains on all sides of it. So it's kind of like a little bowl. And so if you're in the city, air doesn't move as much. You don't get the same kind of wind that you would. And some of that has to do with urbanization, but a lot of it just has to do with the natural terrain. And because of that, Cochabamba has become a very dirty city at times and also has a high level of air pollution. When I was a pastor, I was a pastor for 15 years before we went on the field with IM, our church partnered with Mario and Edis, and we went to the House of Hope. And one of the reasons we went there was to work with a local church who was developing a aquaponic garden system to help provide food for their community. We were there around the end of June, which, if you know anything about the church calendar, especially from the Catholic Church, we were there around the time of the Feast of St. John, which is the middle of, it's like the 21st, 22nd, 23rd of June, somewhere like that. That's also considered the day of the Indigenous New Year, which in the Quechua language, they say it's the day that the llamas cry out and the rocks break in the cold. And so what they do as a way to celebrate Mother Earth is they on that year, it's been banned since then, they set bonfires all over the city. And people were burning everything that would burn so that they could give this wonderful aroma to Mother Earth. Well, what that did was it filled that bowl full of smoke. And for the next 2 weeks, no flights went in and no flights came out, and everyone was stuck because they decided that it was better to burn than it was to protect the land. A lot of the challenges that we run into in the ministry that we do in the foundation, it's called Foundation Project of Hope now, is we work in 16 communities on the outskirts of the city with a lot of folks who've moved to the city for resources. And a lot of the challenges that we run into are how to do sustainable ministries with sustainable resources so that we don't tax the system any more than it already is. And also to try to help to educate folks as to how they can live in an asset-based way, using the things they have around them to make do with what they're doing. Cochabamba in general gets around 17 to 20 inches of rainfall a year. So it's relatively dry. Where it used to be a land filled with lakes and greenery, you're lucky to get rain. As a matter of fact, in the city where our ministry center, the House of Hope is, water is rationed and has been rationed for the past 15 years, to the point where twice a week on Mondays and Thursdays, they turn the water on in our community, and we have to cistern as much water as we can. Unfortunately, because we don't get a lot of rainwater, we can't utilize necessarily the rain collection, but we have a cistern at the house, and you can hear it turn on. You can hear the water start flowing every Monday morning at about 10 o'clock. For about 15 minutes, it fills up the tank, and then same thing on Thursday. And we have very similar situations in a lot of these communities, like what Dwight was explaining, where they truck in truckloads of water and put them in tanks very similar to what you saw in the pictures that he had. And it's very similar in that sense. And so what we've tried to do as a ministry over the years, that began with a project for dignity for pastors and their families, so that they could not only take care of the families, but take care of the earth as well. And that project was that we would come alongside of a pastor and now churches, and we would help them build ecologically friendly homes. In the past, now it's churches in the current, using a system called cob building, which is basically, if you want to think of adobe, it's like super adobe. It's sand, mud, water, and straw. And you basically make mud pies and form them into a home using forms. And what happens is you're using the earth to build a home, and so it mimics a cave. And so you go inside of this church with the walls that are this thick of dirt and rock and mud, and it's always the same temperature, and it's always clean and dry. It's always comfortable. When it's hot outside, it's cool inside. When it's cold outside, it's warm inside, because it mimics what happens in a natural environment of a cave. We also would go into these pastors' homes, and we would teach them how to do keyhole farming. We would teach them how to do composting toilets and water collection when possible, so that they could then begin to take care of their families in such a way that they didn't have to rely on outside help to do that. And now we've done that with a number of ministries where we've helped them set up large keyhole gardens and aquaponic gardens, so that they can minister to the needs of their congregation and their community as well. And so for us, being good stewards of the land has been a big part of what we do in Cochabamba at the Project of Hope Foundation. And we're very fortunate to partner with local believers who have different skill sets that can help us do that. And I'll finish with this story. One of those partnerships comes with an engineer named Israel and his fiance, Marlena. She's an architect and he's an engineer, and they have roots in the Quechua community, but also in Brazil, as his family is from Brazil. And one of the things they had noticed, and is a big part of everything that goes on, is in the destruction of the rainforest in the Amazon. A lot of people remember the big giant fire that happened in the Amazon recently, and you hear all about Brazil. But in the reality, Bolivia had more acreage burned in that fire than Brazil did. And so one of the things that come out of those big fires is they're trying to find a way to use and repurpose the burnt lands. And so he was talking with family members about how they could do that. And they shared with him about this process about making ecological bricks. And so you would take ash from wood, you take dirt, you take water and a little bit of carpenter's glue, and you put it into a vacuum press, and you make bricks that look like Legos. Basically look like Legos. And you then harvest off that water purify that water and use it for other things. But they pull all of that together and they make these ecological bricks. And in doing that, you can put a house up that mimics, in the same way as a cob building, that mimics a cave because it's thicker, it's made of the earth, and it tends to be a very much more cleaner way to build. And so we built a number of churches this way. But he is an engineer, so he came up with the way to do it. But his fiance, hopefully soon will be his wife, is an architect, and so she designs the buildings. And so we work with local brick makers. We work with him and his family, who now have a business making ecological building materials. And she designs the buildings, and he works with us to build them. And we bring teams in when we can. Of course, we haven't been able to do that for about 18 months now because of all that's gone on with the pandemic and some other political issues. But we bring a team in, and what we do is we partner with a local church, or we partner with a local ministry. And whether it's building a building for them to house their ministry, or building a set of bathrooms for children's ministry, or whatever it might be, we work with them and multiple other communities so that they might be able to use what they have, even in the midst of the challenges they're facing around the climate crisis that is happening in Cochabamba. And so we provide and we help them to learn how to provide for themselves in the midst of the challenge. And we do so based on the promise that we find in Isaiah 35 in the first couple verses. It says, the wilderness and the dry land shall be glad, and the desert shall rejoice and blossom, and the crocus it shall blossom abundantly, and rejoice with joy and singing. The glory of Lebanon shall be given to it, and the majesty of Carmel and Sharon, and they shall see the glory of the Lord in their place. So that's our story. And we try our best to, in the midst of the challenge of the climate crisis, to do education, to empower people to look within themselves, to find the ways that they can do their best to take care of not only their communities, but they can take care of the world around them, and that they can see a better day in Cochabamba.
JD, thank you so much. I was impressed and moved by how often you talked about adaptation to helping people know that they can find ways to adapt and thus find hope even in difficult situations. So, and we are all facing many difficult situations, and learning that we can grow, change, adapt, be resilient spiritually, physically is a critical key along the way. Okay, Steve and Nancy James, who've been our missionaries in Haiti for ages, recommended that I contact Guy Buckmaster. I don't think Guy could be labeled as a global servant of the American Baptist churches or a missionary. He's just this entrepreneur for great practices in agriculture and justice and restoring people to decent lives. So I'm really looking forward to what Guy is going to talk to us about. You're on, my friend.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and also, I guess, in Dr. Stephen James's absence and Nancy's absence, I guess I'll thank them for that, but we'll see as we conclude. Anyway, I'm a great grandson of the first missionary bishop to Haiti for the Episcopal Church, and that began my calling to Haiti. I've also been fortunate in my life to graduate from Virginia Tech, the major in mechanical engineering and a minor in agriculture, and have a farm in Virginia, raise 4 lovely children and have 7 grandchildren, which presses upon my heart to give back and to be concerned about our world. And so a resonating theme with me has always been to show God's love in a tangible way. And reluctantly, actually, I had a calling to Haiti. Now I'm going to try and overcome my technical challenge. I'm 70 here in about less than 60 days. And I've had to keep up with technology because of my children and my grandchildren. So I've got a little bit on it, but we're going to try and get to share a screen in a presentation that I have for you. Here we go. share. Now, I hope that's sharing to you now.
That was a good first step. Excellent.
Okay. So anyway, currently, after many years down in Haiti and working, I actually started around in 2008, 2009, down a lot since the earthquake in 2010, which happened on January 12th, devastating a lot of the, well, let's see, that didn't work to change slides. Devastating a lot of the, let's see if I can figure out how to change slides here. Okay, devastating a lot of the urban area around Port-au-Prince and Léogâne, and I went to Léogâne and put in 5 wells, courtesy of a major donor out of state of Arkansas, through an introduction with the Arkansas Baptist Association. I have done quite a bit of global Baptist work, contrary to the earlier introduction. And I've also been youth director at my Baptist churches in the past too, not currently. I guess I'm getting out of touch. Anyway, this is in Haiti, in and around UCNH, or the University of Christians of North Haiti. And for the past few years, I've been engaged there. And what you're seeing is the from the mountain area around the valley. And if you can take note of, this is the land of Haiti, or Haiti, the land of mountains. Over 60% of it has a slope of 30% or more. It's against the law to be farming on 30% slopes, but you can see it in their pictures in front of you. So they start farming at the bottom of the mountain, and as the fertility ends, they move further and further up the mountain. This has some regard for erosion, but not much, as you can tell. And this is what primarily happens throughout Haiti. And so this led me to actually, I saw Reverend Dr. Jules Cassius had joined us earlier, and he's not currently with us, but I consider him the Billy Graham of Haiti. And I had hired 12 agronomists. And after working with these 12 agronomists, I could tell that 5 of them were different. This is coffee in this picture here. And I asked them where they went to school to learn their agronomy. And it turned out that the 5 out of the 7 and the 5 that seemed really different all came from the same university, UCNH, which was transformed from a Baptist seminary into a multidisciplinary college. And I think now it's been about 28 years ago that happened. This is actually right outside of Lembe, the Bay of Lembe, reportedly where Christopher Columbus came and landed there and was a barbarian in that country. You notice the bee in the picture here with the coffee. This is actually coffee in bloom, by the way. Bees are very important, and I appreciate the earlier reference to bees, because we really need to save the bees for our planet to live. And we need our planet to live in order to stop migration. This is UCNH, and as you can see, it's very treed, very beautiful. They don't allow cutting of trees on their 19-acre campus here. It was a rubber plantation in years past, exploitation by foreigners, and was converted to a seminary, as I said, 47 years ago. Currently around 1,200 students, maybe a little bit less because of COVID and so forth, but it's in the north of Haiti, outside of Cap-Haïtien, roughly about 9 miles south. Here's Dr. Cassius right here. He actually sought me out as he was getting ready to retire, and asked me to collaborate with him in trees. He sent a letter to the current president of the university stating that I had planted over 250,000 trees throughout Haiti and worked with many of their former students in agriculture. And it would be to the benefit of the country to collaborate together and to form a restoration project that involved reforestation. And so hence was born the Rural Reforestation and Restoration Initiative. I look at problems as only opportunities for solutions, and there are many problems in Haiti. Controlling erosion is just one of them. But using technologies that have been developed here, even in Florida, you learn about them as salt sloping agricultural land technology, utilizes a way to stop this erosion. And you'll start to see some of these pictures here now of what's been instituted through the university. So you can see terracing, you can see windbreaks, you can see tree breaks, you can see consideration for the types of food that are grown and the needs for energy, all the way at the top being the wood lot. Wood's not going away in Haiti as a source of energy. And it actually is the #1 economy for the country, and will continue to be so because the economic opportunities are so slack in the country. Here's a way to overcome it. Here's, taking the picture of the the theory and putting it into practice. And that's really what I'd like to have done down in Haiti and at the university. They teach a lot of good theory at the university, and including this university, but practical application has been missing. And that was one of the areas that Dr. Cassius asked me to get involved in, and also to carry their university outside their walls. So we developed this project. It's very intense. It's a lot of words here to see through, but it's very inclusive. As you can look through it, it touches a lot of the areas that can build to a stronger country that is actually near collapse at this time. We look at the ecological development. We look at leadership development. We look at capacity development, economic opportunities for women. And women, I've discovered, and I think it's factual, you can have this inborn nurturing desire to impact many, much more than my male counterparts. I find them more tenacious and working in some of the more difficult areas in agriculture. And I've enjoyed their capacity to spread what they learn rather than keep that capacity hidden within themselves. So the birth of the Reforestation and Restoration Initiative happened, restoring and protecting Haiti's natural and human resources. And in 2013, one of my trips down there and working in coffee again, I wrote a paper on coffee restoration, and one of the concluding areas, which actually I saw that Dr. Ken quoted me on, was that the U.S. debate on comprehensive immigration reform should also focus on mitigating economic conditions in immigrant countries in Central America and total of Latin America and the Caribbean as a necessary component for preventing the entry of undocumented workers into the United States. And we see these people at our doorstep in every way. I mean, Haitians are coming every day to the United States, make no mistake about it. So within this birthing, how do I go and get funds? I've been around and knocked on doors. I've made presentations in churches. I've had a foundation, close all those efforts. I knew that my country is sending a lot of money to Haiti. Y'all know that. You know what it's spent for? I wanted to find out what it was spent for. My dad was FBI, so I started investigating. I found out what it was spent for, not spent well. So I made a proposal. I brought in together a collaboration with Agroforza, and we made a submission to Avance, which is a consultancy through DAI of USAID, our State Department's funds. And I got a $150,000 grant to do 7 months of work in Haiti with the Education and Biodiversity for Cacao Excellence. Basically what we did is we did the entire value chain experience at the university. We also went out and trained 110 extension service agencies, the first ever in Haiti. And we reached 500 farmers in improving their cacao production. And we also solidified our value to Ficano, Pisa, and Novella, the large consolidators and exporters and processors of cacao chocolate in Haiti. The conclusion of that program gave us accolades, actually. We got a letter from DAI that said, we overcame adversity. The country was shut down when we executed this program. It was very, very hard to execute. But people who got their certification actually ended up in jobs in the cacao industry. Also, people who went through it because of the business training that was involved in the program started their own businesses. I can point to 4 very successful businesses right here today. So the university is saying to themselves, well, what's next? So we've already looked at what's next is, and that'd be a similar initiative that was so successful, and that'll be looking at all of the trees of value that can grow, that complement each other, that produce an economic input. So now if we put the trees in the ground, they don't get cut down and used for that number one economic value chain, charcoal. We don't want them cut down once we put them in the ground. So we want the entire value chain experience. Breadfruit, which is highly nutritious, we can put that whole experience in there. I actually have the dryers manufactured in Haiti and Jacmel, and have people in the north producing the flour and having it sold not only locally, but exporting it now. But the real impact is, what can you pour into another? And who's going to do it? If not you, then who? You know, we're all old guys sitting around here. There's one young guy I see on here. I was glad to see him. He's a lot younger than me anyway. And so who's going to do all of this? And what happens out of this? You know, what motivates you to do this? What you see up in the upper right-hand corner is one of the young men that was in the program. And he recalled my Kennedy, President Kennedy's speech at his inauguration, which I said, you know, I'm going to use his words. He says, I remember you said in the class, agroecology, don't say what Haiti can do for someone, but search to see what you can do to change something in Haiti. I will never forget that. That's pouring into an individual who will pour into another. And that's what remains. No monuments, no trees, no anything, but what one pours into another will remain. Now, Dr. Donna, who's the president of the university, you know, said to me, he says, one can perceive your actions as disruptive innovation that shifts from old, closely held progress to radical, positive, open movements forward in concert with beeline focus upon the well-being of the country through relationships building and institutional capacity advancement. Truly, that's what's guided me to go to the university to teach and to carry the people outside the walls and to build the value chain structures so that they can see before themselves and be taught before themselves how to help their fellow patients. It involved the Haitian community, a couple of white guys, but the council was a Haitian council. They're the ones who have to dig in and preserve their country. We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children. And believe me, I've implanted that in people in Haiti. I've been fortunate to go down to Haiti and present what God has presented to me in Genesis 2:15. You know, he put us in the Garden of Eden. Granted, we got booted out, but he didn't take us all the way out. We have the Garden of Eden in our backyard. He is in us and we are in him. If God and Jesus has my DNA, poor him, but I'm sure glad I have his DNA in me, because with that DNA, that's the empowerment to do this. I cannot do this, but I go to Haiti by myself. Doctor, I'm going to tell you, it's a strange thing. My own church here in my community, when I made a trip down for my very first trip, told me I was crazy. And I didn't even get a prayer. I had to find the Haitian church to get a prayer to go to Haiti. And I'm going to tell you, that was the best prayer ever, because I keep coming. I can't even count the number of times I've been to Haiti. The Haiti people deserve our attention. Without their attention, their beautiful island will turn into a rock. The erosion that takes place in Haiti is probably more significant there than any other place on the face of the earth. The things that are propelling it are the continued economic disadvantage of the majority of the people. Their only choice is to go to the number one economic opportunity. And if they keep cutting down the trees, there will be no soil left. And a nation can only be as rich as its soil. The quality of its soil will dictate the agrarian economy and the quality of the people to be self-sustainable and regenerative. If they can't regenerate themselves, how can we help them? So you have to pour into them so that they stand alone and you do not become their Superman solving all the problems. I appreciate everybody who's been on presenter here, because that's exactly what they sound like. And that's what it takes. It's selfishness. It's less of me and more of him. And with that, I'm going to conclude.
Wow. Well, if you'll end your screen sharing,
I'll try and do that now.
As I'm saying, thank you for all you do and the person you are and all the folks you're teaching. I just have to throw in a one-liner here. Guy just said a nation can only be as rich as the quality of its soil. In the United States, and our problem is not as severe as it is around the world.
I beg to differ.
But we lose 3 to 6 tons of topsoil per acre of agricultural land per year in this country, and we're doing better than most. 3 to 4 tons per acre. It will be all gone at the current rate in about 50 years. And the causes are all of the modern industrial agricultural techniques that have supplanted all the ways of growing and being related to creation that God gave us for our well-being. And that is simply one of a number of predicaments that are all intersected, that are causing collapse or potential collapse of the whole environmental system, and so on and so forth. And there's one more slide in Rebecca's PowerPoint, and if she'll put that on the screen now, I just want to tell you that as I'm concluding, I wanted to share a resource that was just published by Sojourners magazine. And they on the back cover of the latest issue, which is now on your screen, they have this, I think it's about 20 pages, 18-page of material that is developed specifically to answer questions coming from churches. So what's going on and how can we get involved and started? And of many resources I've examined, this one is not only free, but it's an extremely good resource. And you simply type in sojo.net/ZINE. And they will send you the link. You can download it, print it, and no one is going to charge you or tell you you're violating copyright. And you can give that to families because it's very family friendly, and to any church or Christian or any person who wants to find a way to get started in making a difference in the world. Rebecca, at this point, is going to bring our conversation to a close with a word of prayer. But before that, I just want to remind you that this entire conference today has been recorded. I will be including it in my newsletter that I send out every Wednesday, which you can sign up for at godisjustlove.com, which is our newsletter site, godisjustlove.com, all small letters crowded together. And it will be found at, if you just do a Google search or a YouTube search on Dr. Ken Witt. And then I believe it will also be posted at other places like our climate justice task group in the American Baptist Churches on that Facebook page. And it can be posted and used anywhere else that you want. It's it will be as widely available as anyone wants to make it. So Rebecca's going to close us, but if you would like to stay online for a bit and engage in a question and answer with any of the presenters, that would be just fine. I have till about 5 o'clock, and you're also free to sign out anytime you need to, but I would immediately invite Rebecca to share a final word with us.
It's so good to be here with you all today. Thank you, Ken, for your work convening us, and thank you to Dwight and David and JD and Guy for your presentations today. Thank you for the reflections you've had and the information that you've given us to reflect on as well. So as we close this afternoon, I'd like to share with you a prayer that was written by the UN Environmental Sabbath. It's included in the book Earth Gospel, A Guide to Prayer for God's Creation, compiled by Samuel Hamilton Poore. So I invite you into a time of prayer with me. Great Spirit, give us hearts to understand, never to take from creation's beauty more than we give, never to destroy wantonly for the furtherance of greed, never to deny to give our hands for the building of earth's beauty, never to take from her what we cannot use. Give us hearts to understand that to destroy earth's music is to create confusion, that to wreck her appearance is to blind us to beauty, that to callously pollute her fragrance is to make a house of strength, and that as we care for her, she will care for us. This we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you to all, and let's keep each other in thought and prayer as we go about our ministries and work in this world. If you need to sign out, please do so. But I will immediately open up to kind of a free-for-all. Don't want to control the questions, and so we're just going to let the conversation be open at this point.
Okay. Ken, could I say a word?
Absolutely.
Hey, I'm sorry I got in a little late, but there was a couple of things that hit me, and I was listening to all of this, and I noticed that in terms of climate change, the approaches almost on everybody is adaptation, whereas another approach is mitigation.
Yes.
And I think adaptation really, in my own mind, is the way to go. I'm sort of pessimistic on mitigation. I'm a NASA Earth ambassador. I was trained by NASA in climate change and gave a number of conferences on it. And the life cycle of carbon in the carbon cycle in the atmosphere is about 14,000 years. So once it's up there, it's there, unless you have some very costly way of removing it from the atmosphere, which I don't think we're going to do in time. And I think we're very close to the tipping point. What I mean is the tipping point is the point of no return. And I heard today on TV where Mr. Biden wants to reduce the United States' carbon contribution to the atmosphere by 50% by 2030. And that's only the US. You got to do it all around the world for this to help. And I am just from my own experience in outreach and climate change, there are too many people that deny it. We saw that in the last 4 years of our presidency. And I think that we're really in trouble. And I think that your approach of adaptation probably will be our only choice. I think mitigation, I hope it works. That's somehow reversing climate change. But I think that it's, I am sort of pessimistic that it will ever occur in time to solve the problem.
Let me make a general response and then be more personal in my own thinking. We sent out to as many people as we could an article that was written by global indigenous people communities, and that article begins with the title. Does anybody remember? Let me see. It's I know it's in here somewhere. Yeah, here it is. It's got the title, Preparing for the End of the World as We Know It. And then it has a chart, which although it's in boxes form, it's really a continuum of how bad you see the crisis and how broad you see the crisis. And then the steps that one is likely to take depending on how they view the crisis. And so if you believe we've already crossed tipping points and that the 2% figure for carbon is, we're already going way past that. And there's other predicaments that are going to intersect and make that even worse. Then not only do you have to adapt to the realities that are going to come along, and the life that my wife and I are living is in large measure to help people learn that they can adapt to changing circumstances, and their lives can become even better because they're living close to the earth, learning to garden organically, learning to make topsoil, teaching the grandchildren to make topsoil. That's kind of all the enterprises. But I also believe that that helping people grow spiritual resilience, which is, in my definition, the capacity to do well and to be loving, to have hope, to be a loving person, no matter what the circumstances around you, to grow a spiritual resilience that trusts in God no matter what is going on, and to build the communities, usually much smaller communities, wherein one can learn, live, and teach those core values is the way ahead for Christians. But right now, in American Baptist churches and in most Christian communities, simply getting people to pay attention to the possibility that it matters and that there are practical things we can do, the next right thing we can do, is that task is really hard, and really hard. And we've been having an extremely difficult time as a denomination getting the attention of the larger community, even as it applies to God asks us to steward the earth. However, I think, Nick, that you're totally right on that although mitigation needs to be used because often it's the best right thing a person can do, it won't fix the larger problems. So we need to learn to adapt to whatever circumstances, but even more, we need to grow a spiritual resilience in a community that can live these core values together. There's a participant in the conversation here named Nancy Flinchbach. She's actually the only person who's been to our place in the hills of southeastern Ohio to see what we're up to and what we're trying to teach our grandchildren and others. And now she's trying to sit up straight in her chair. Nancy's also the author of a number of books, and one of them is called Listening to the Earth. And a lot of folk are out there in the world are saying to us, you really need to find some meditative, quiet space. Listen to the earth, listen to the spirit, listen to the scriptures, listen, and then do what the spirit, what the earth tells you to do. And you will be given your marching orders. And Nancy is really gifted at teaching folk how to stop, listen, pay attention, listen to the voice of God that comes through the creation. So Nancy, you want to respond to any of that?
Well, I just think, I think all of the people on the call have a sense of call from God, and I personally think like the earth is calling out, God is calling out to all of us in this time. We're in a state of emergency with our planet, but the planet is so spectacular.
Yeah.
It's such, yeah. And so, I like to practice Lectio Divina, which is a way the monks used to practice reading the scripture. We can also read the earth, and it's a great exercise you can do with a group just to marvel at the miracles, but also sometimes to reflect on the disasters that are happening with the earth as well. I still have a lot of hope myself. I don't want to give up hope. And my husband and I are involved in Citizens Climate Lobby, and he does a program called En-ROADS, which is a climate simulator, which shows what it would take in order to start to slow the release of carbon and get to the point where we might have a livable planet. And one of the really important things is to have a revenue neutral carbon fee and dividend, which would tax the fossil fuels and allow the free market to develop more alternative energy. And so we participate with Citizens Climate Lobby, and they basically are in all the congressional districts now in the United States. We haven't convinced President Biden. We have not convinced a lot of the people on both sides of the aisle, but there has been a bill introduced again into the House. So anyway, that's where we put a lot of our energy. But I think, what Ken and Kathy are doing is really great too. And I'm really glad that the American Baptist Church is taking this seriously. My husband and I taught a Sunday school class a couple of years ago, and it is just really hard still to call people's attention to the problem. And, I think realistically, the problem is the fossil fuel industry has been spending millions of dollars, billions probably, trying to influence our elections. And that's why people don't believe in climate change. There's been an intentional plan to keep people from believing that. Yeah. So we're fighting uphill, but we're people of faith. And we know God created this incredible planet. So I'm still hopeful that we can find a path forward. But I meditate every day and listen to the earth, and it's a wonderful practice. When I got my letters from the earth, the main thing God kept telling me, speak up for the earth, take action, applaud the people. So I applaud all of you on this call who are working for the climate. At the same time, we may be in a hospice situation. And so what do people in hospice do? They try to enjoy every day. And so that's the other thing, is to enjoy every moment that we're alive, to give thanks, to dance, to sing, to love,
When I talk to children about all these things, I say, so what's your job one? To get up in the morning and have fun. Thank you very much. Nancy and Steve are members of the First Baptist Church of Springfield, Ohio, where I finished my last